St. Luke's account of the Transfiguration is framed around prayer. How does our gospel begin? Jesus took Peter, John, and James and went up a mountain to pray. So what was the purpose in the mind of the disciples? Clearly, to pray. When does the Transfiguration itself occur? St. Luke continues, "While he was praying, his face changed in appearance and became dazzling white." The Transfiguration occurs when Jesus himself is praying. So let's consider what the mystery of the Transfiguration teaches us about prayer. When Jesus is transfigured, there's a light or glory that immerses him. We also hear that Moses and Elijah appeared to him. What is their purpose? Why are they there? St. Luke tells us, they spoke of his exodus that he was going to accomplish in Jerusalem. The event of the Transfiguration occurs shortly before Jesus' entry into Jerusalem during Holy Week. This exodus is the exodus from sin and death. Through Jesus' passion, death, and resurrection, he leads humanity out of the power of sin and death into God's kingdom. This is his mission. This reminds us of one of the motives, one of the benefits of prayer. When things appear difficult or unclear, we can turn to God in prayer. We can retreat from all the clamor and busyness of the world and ask God to remind us of his will for us, his purpose for our life. We might also be tempted to look over the details and pass over this transformation Christ goes through, this radiance. We might too easily give in and say, well, Jesus is the incarnate Son of God. I'm a mere mortal. How could I possibly experience something like this? This radiance helps me appreciate Jesus, which is very good, but doesn't seem to have much that pertains to me. The great scripture scholar Cornelius A. Lapide can help us understand the connection between Jesus' radiance, prayer, and our destiny. He says that prayer is the transfiguration of the soul. The soul receives light from God, that she may know him and herself and all things more clearly. By it, the soul seeks and obtains grace to blot out the stains and vices by which she is deformed. She is raised above herself and is lifted up to God in heaven. In prayer, she unites herself to God. Through prayer, God transforms our soul. We can see our soul go through a similar transformation. When Jesus is transfigured, his radiance doesn't blot out his human nature, it elevates it. By continuing to show his humanity, Jesus reveals our destiny. Our bodies and souls will be glorified in heaven. For us to be rewarded with this, we have to submit ourselves to the work of prayer described by Cornelius a Lapide, and really so many of the saints. The saints of the East name this process theosis. The saints of the West name this process divinization. In his writing on the Incarnation, St. Athanasius says, "For the Son of God became man so that we might become God, or like God." This is what the terms theosis and divinization capture, and this is what the Transfiguration brings to light. When we commit to the work of prayer, we receive grace. Grace in general gives us a greater share in the life of the Trinity. Depending on what we need in a given moment in our life, that grace will serve different purposes. Sometimes it will be a grace which pulls us from a tendency of sin towards a greater desire for virtue, for right action. At other times, it will create a greater charity, a greater desire, love for God himself. Other times, God's grace will give light to our minds. It will remind us of our mission in that moment, and it can even help us understand God himself more clearly. All of this contributes to our own souls growing in semblance to Christ's. One thing necessary in this process that we so often overlook is silence. We hear that the 3 apostles fell silent after hearing the voice of the Father. Keeping time for silence in prayer helps us remember that this work of making us holy, making us like God, is primarily God's work. Prayer is the disposition we enter to be ready to receive this transformation, but God is the one who does this work, and he speaks to us and works in us in silence. Making our hearts and minds silent in prayer remind us that we are dependent on God, and that his action goes far beyond our own thoughts and desires. Wherever we are in our spiritual life, whether we're at the beginning stages or the more advanced, the Transfiguration reminds us of the true purpose of prayer. Prayer is reaching out to God in the hope of being more closely united to him and having our lives elevated to experience more of the divine life each day. May we all recommit to daily prayer with a firm faith and hope that God's grace may lead us to the glory Jesus shows us in the Transfiguration.